Thank you so much for joining. Welcome, Lina, for today's perspectives. Um, Perspectives are talks that give us an opportunity to step out of the familiarity of our design-related discipline and engage with issues and concerns that would allow us to develop a more holistic and interdisciplinary approach to design and architecture. We welcome artists, activists, filmmakers, photographers, and others who can help us provide this fresh outlook, which would help us develop our own practices in the future. Today, we have with us Lina Vincent, who is an art historian and curator, and who is committed towards socially conscious practices. We'll have a discussion for the next 30 to 40 minutes with her, and then we'll move on to questions and answers from the students. Students, if you have questions while Lina is speaking, please leave them in the chat box. And before anything else, without any delays, we'll have Lina now speak. Lina, you're on mute.
After 2 years of this, it still doesn't happen automatically. Thank you so much, and it's lovely to be here. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this evening discussion, Perspectives. I think that what I'll do is directly to open up my presentation and perhaps begin by sharing a bit about my journey as a curator and the different things that have been happening along this journey. So, if I have access to that, then I will do so. So, sure. Yes. So, yeah. Can you all see the screen?
Yes, yeah.
Great. So, well, yes, I am a curator and an art historian, and I currently live in Goa, but I work across different cities in India. And why I've called this milestones, mistakes, and more is that's exactly the way I perceive my own practice as a curator over the past 2 decades. There have been plenty of milestones, there have been plenty of mistakes, lots of learning, and it has never had a dull moment. Because I am an art historian, I think it's easier to start at that place where we understand what is this word curator altogether and where did it come from. So it was a term that was used for a priest, and later, of course, it became associated with some sort of manager of material. It was only much later, like after the 1960s, that the curator became someone who was handling this sort of contextual grouping in exhibitions and to do with art itself. And then the curator himself or herself became a powerful figure because some of the largest uh, discussions of contemporary art movements happened with a curatorial view in place. And some say now that the curator has, in fact, got too much of power, or maybe, diminishing what an artist may be doing. So, anyway, I began as a curator not through a process of studying to be a curator, but I trained in printmaking. I was a fine artist. I did my master's in art history, but I had a deep interest in other people's art. I realized that more than doing, my own art, I wanted to look at what others were doing, how they were explaining themselves, and I understood these spaces and I wanted to be in that position of mediating. I think that until today, I see myself as a curator and as a mediator more than anything else. So that's what I see curation as. Uh, Very early on, I wanted to experiment with group exhibitions, with bringing different sorts of voices together. So I did video, I did printmaking. I worked with folk art. I got the opportunity to work with a large number of artists across India. Um, the thing that I realized was that there was a constant process and progress in an artist's world. And that was something that I was interested in. And that's what led me into this space of writing and curation. This sort of being a practicing artist myself gave me an advantage, or I see it as an advantage in looking into other people's practices. So, right from very young artists to quite senior artists, I feel comfortable. I feel comfortable in the studio space. It's one of my favorite spaces. And the pandemic, in fact, prevented me from spending as much time as I wanted to in a studio. But we hope that things are going to get only better from now on. I'm going to speak about a few areas within which majorly my work, in fact, gets done, and the spaces that I'm interested in myself. One of them, of course, is environmental consciousness in the arts. And this sort of space is occupied by artists who both address it within their work and also artists who move out into the community and into an environmental space and work there directly. So it's a whole, gamut of discussions that take place here. And besides that, I'm always also keen and aware that when I curate a show, the material within the show also should have an understanding of this sort of space, which is more friendly towards the environment and not, printing tons of flex and tons of catalogs and tons of production that is all going to go waste. This was a recent exhibition that I did that was at Bikaner House, one of the first exhibitions, in fact, that was physical after a very long time of doing online exhibitions. In this, the artists were looking at this discussion of being in transit being a sort of symbolic understanding of there being no planet B. And where do we go from here? If we destroy this planet, if we destroy this space that we are living in currently, we don't have another space to go to. And the artists, in fact, responded in so many different ways. This, in fact, is something interesting for me because someone like Venugopal Viji, I have been working with him over the past 16 or 17 years. And someone like Samir Mohanty on the right, I have known him only for a couple of years. But for me, that's one of the most interesting parts about being a curator. It's a sort of ongoing relationship that I have with the artist and his or her work, their work. And this is the kind of dialogue that builds over the years. In this exhibition, in fact, they all came together beautifully. There was a lot of discussion, of course, because it was in Delhi. There was an enormous discussion about urbanism, about the way the quality of life has been changing, of course, about the consciousness of migration and the class distinctions that we have in our society that really put a pressure on certain classes and perhaps not the others that we particularly noticed during the pandemic. And here, what happens is in many of these cases, policymakers, poets, people who are working within different fields, they also become part of the discussion. And this is what enriches this entire space of curation. It doesn't stop there. It is a dialogue. Art then, becomes a dialogue or an interface for for further extension of these discussions. So we have gatherings, we talk about work, we understand different people's perspectives, and we also understand what solutions we can put into our own work days and our own life. So it doesn't stop at being an art object in a gallery, but the dialogue continues into something which is much more, which goes beyond these spaces into homes, into our very thoughts and processes. So, this understanding that art can, in fact, impact social change, art can make creative solutions, art can invite people from different fields to come together in a collaborative space. This is something that I have explored deeply. I am part of Art Port Making Waves, which is an international curatorial organization that works with artists across the globe, not only artists, but all sorts of creative practitioners, but also scientists, educators, people who are, working in government spaces, to understand how we can participate in in creative solutions. How do we look at our space and um, try and create these sort of sustainable approaches, which are not easy to do because it's simple to talk about it. It's simple to talk about the word sustainable, but it's really, really difficult, as we all know, to bring that practices in those practices into our homes. So, what is interesting about working in this sort of curatorial mode is that we don't only have artists, but we also have other people engaging with the entire sphere. So, we have medical practitioners, we have those working with heritage, we have those working in schools, others who are, something like a repair cafe, which is talking about repair, conservation of old materials so that you're not buying new things all the time, but you're using older stuff. Everything sort of becomes interlinked with this discussion of art. And that's what, I have found as a really beautiful space because art is the starting point. It makes the communication possible because visual material automatically they touch people at an emotional level where long texts or large paragraphs of words cannot. So, this is something that has been part of my practice, part of something that I have enjoyed, and part of what I have seen really, really engages with people in different ways. So, performing artists like Katerina, they make performances which are very real, which are in the public space. It gives rise to lots of questions, but it also then brings awareness to what we're talking about. And here in her case, it was the Hyderabad Lit Fest, and she was talking about memories of food, but also understanding where food comes from. Does it come, directly from a farm to your plate, or does it take a long journey along, creating so many carbon footprints? So this was good food. India. And somehow for me, this Umesh's work always comes back and has come back several times through the pandemic, considering that his work was about breath and how we are, now really we know now how to safeguard that very precious thing that is breath. So, in terms of this engagement with different artists, their different languages, their way of saying things, and then ultimately communicating one theme or one broad concept is something that I have been part of. And what happens is that this dialogue that is relating what all the artists are saying with the concept and then with an audience is what I do and is what I enjoy doing. So, for instance, this was a very subtle work. It was simply images of starved persons printed on these serviettes that went along with the snacks. Some people noticed it and were shocked. Others didn't notice it. They just took the serviette, wiped their hands and mouth, and threw it. Some took them away with them very reverently. This is Bindu Mehra's work. So, this is the sort of uh, very exciting and unsure experience that you can have with art that I really enjoy. But it's not only about artistic spaces and people of of a certain intellectual or educational level, let's say, participating, but also schools. We have done programs across schools, across India, working with students and bringing these works of art, videos, films, uh, and even various sorts of installations, bringing them into spaces where then students can understand what it is to make some sort of creative and sustainable decisions for themselves, and therefore influence their parents. This is another project that I have been part of. It is, I live in Goa. And so, as some of you might know, the mining situation here has been extremely complicated in the sense that there were several companies that were working illegally. They have not been taken care of. The aftermath of the kind of work that they do and the kind of resources that they dig out, there are spaces where there are these massive barren hills, uh, enormous holes in the ground where the offlow has in fact impacted the water levels, impacted the rivers, and also the condition of the peoples in those areas. So the Goenchi Mati movement is working on a more sustainable approach, but it is also to do with the future we need. The future we need being something has to remain for future generations. That we cannot consume everything that we have without thinking of what has to come in the future. And artists here have played such an enormous role in creating publicity material, in fact, donating their works towards these public screenings, programs, um, communication material, posters, cards, so many things. So this whole understanding of participating in this space where you do what you can best. And if it's art, then it's art. Then you do that in order to participate in this larger discussion that is around you. And it could be anything because we, in fact, face different things in different cities. In many of the cities, we are facing the same depletion of our green spaces. We are facing a depletion of resources, and time is running out. And that's something that becomes like a constant reminder. This work is by Parvati Nair. It was part of a show I curated, a solo exhibition of hers. And here she did a 3-month long project where she invited people to support the program by donating their trash. And this is literally a wave of trash. The entire installation is constructed, as you can see, with all sorts of cosmetic bottles and Harpic bottles and so many different things that we see every day in stores, in our homes, chucked in landfills. But through this entire exercise, it was a sort of dialogue of people coming in, not to donate their trash, yes, but also to realize how much they are contributing to these landfills and therefore to the continuous sort of hindrance to this entire space that we call Earth. So for me, it has always been about this. Like I said, I see myself as a mediator, and as it's said over here, it's it's not a romanticized space. It is a lot of hard work. It's about really understanding materials. It's about working through the night and getting works up on walls. It's about following up with irate uh, come people from uh, you know, the post office or the customs to get some body of work released so that it can be part of an exhibition. So, it's completely a vast space of work that invites a lot of learning as it goes forward, because it's not only about one thing. It's about the understanding of various different spaces. And I always understand that there is a sort of power that goes with being a curator, because I do work with a lot of young artists. I do work with a lot of folk artists. I know how much it's possible to make a very impressionable sort of space and to tell somebody, this is not the way to work, but this is the way to work. And they will change that. And I'm so aware of that when I work. And I completely understand that this is a space also that has to be ethical. It is a space where you have to respect others' voices. You have to respect this collaborative space as well, which is a shared space between a curator, an artist, and a gallery perhaps, or a museum, and allow it to grow in a way where everybody's voice is, possibly having the same space. So this is Kalyan Joshi, who is a third artist. And throughout, the past 10, 15 years, I've had a deep engagement with indigenous artists working in different parts of India. It has been a long realization that it's a very complicated position because fine arts and the folk and tribal arts, as they're called, are always divided. They are kept in different spaces, they are evaluated and priced differently, they are shown to collectors in a different way. Collectors, I wouldn't call them collectors. People who are vaguely interested in some kind of art might go and pick up a Madhubani or a Varli piece cheaply from a Delhi Haat or some sort of roadside bazaar. But if it is put in a gallery and it is priced at, let's say, the same price as a contemporary urban artist, 1.5 lakhs, then they will say, why? Why should I pay that for this artist? Even though this artist perhaps has worked for much longer and much more than the urban artist. But that's the sort of, that is a sort of dichotomy that exists. In my work, I have had the opportunity to build bridges, perhaps in certain exhibitions that I've done, wherein I've invited indigenous artists to be on the same platform as urban artists without even mentioning that they're folk, but just saying that this is an exhibition of contemporary art to allow everybody their freedom of expression without saying what their background or what their conditioning is, which creates more and more discrimination as we go forward. So from Kerala murals by someone like this artist to Bhaju Sham's fantastic screen print work that he's been doing recently, Kalam Patua, who has created a completely new style of the Kalighat, but and various other artists. I have had the opportunity and I continue to work with a large number of these artists, continually attempting to bridge these gaps and also trying to understand how it's possible to create a better ecosystem for all these artists to take part in. Printmaking, of course, is something that is very close to my heart. And as a printmaker myself, it's a space that I am constantly engaging with. I do make prints on occasion when I'm running a workshop or if someone has invited me as an artist, which is a rare thing, but it does happen. But to be part of this international community of printmakers, to constantly see fresh work is something that has been it's always of great inspiration to me. But the person who first gave me the opportunity to really curate a very large exhibition was in 2011-12, Vasvo X Vasvo, who is a photographer and a collector. And he also works on collaborative miniatures. I curated his collection of Indian printmaking in this exhibition Between the Lines, Identity, Place and Power that was held at the NGMAs, which is the National Gallery of Modern Art Spaces in Mumbai and Bangalore. And it was also accompanied with a book um, that went along with the whole thing. And it was one of the few large scale exhibitions, I would say, that really spoke about printmaking, which is often a marginalized medium because it is considered to be made out of reproductions, it is confused with the digital reproducing, and is often, not collected for that reason. So it's been a wonderful space hosting exhibitions in different cities, also working with young people who participate in workshops, produce different sorts of prints. Again, looking at it as an entire gamut of artists, both the very unknown, but also, stalwarts and masters in our space like Anupam Sood. So I feel extremely privileged to have worked with artists of all types, both Indian and international, to have been part of symposiums that discussed how to make improvements in these spaces, because we all understand that our arts education systems are also sometimes somewhat in a complicated space. We do have lots of gaps, lots of gray areas, spaces where mentorship does not necessarily take part in an artist's progress after they leave college, which leaves many floundering for some kind of answers or some sort of methodologies to follow in their practices. So, working with international artists, working with Indian artists across uh, various different states, various different platforms. This is the work of Ravi Kumar Kashi. It has given me an interesting perspective over the years because there are many artists like him whose work I have been writing on over the past 12, 15 years. And so it's a growing and evolving space where I keep understanding a little more about what an artist is doing. So this is an important thing because a curator space, like I said, can be powerful. It can be one of great responsibility as well. It's not only about putting some art together in a white cube space, but also participating in this larger cultural dialogue that can be about anything at all that happens in society, because artists are deeply mirroring what is happening around them at all times. So social justice, all the other you know elements of loss that we are facing in our everyday life is something that has also entered into my work, from having worked on these various projects that involve museum spaces, but also living heritage. So, coming from different parts of India, I think that the awareness that we are a uh, culturally rich country, with each community practicing its own stream of rituals and customs, but also following these aesthetics that are so deeply embedded in a socio-religious sort of space. These are some things that keep coming up in the research work that I do. So on a particular fellowship that I did with the Goa Chitra Museum in Benolem, with the India Foundation for the Arts, I developed a year-long series of programs that invited the public to come and engage with the museum in different ways. So for me, the idea of objects as something that can be alive and not dead in a museum space is important. And I often invite contemporary artists as well to come and then engage with objects that own their own history, but then that can be opened out in so many different ways when you look at it in a contemporary space. So these are the sort of things that I have chosen from here and there to share with you today. And another really favorite exhibition of mine was, working on this uh, large showcase called Tabiat, Medicine and Healing in India, that looked at uh, medicine through a cultural lens. And it involved every sort of medicine, from the ritual, practices that are done in parts of South India to the really funny side of popular culture, where you have somebody sitting on the roadside and cleaning your ears or your nose with little tools. So we had every sort of work. Here you see Santosh Kumar Das's um, Hanuman bringing aims to Gujarat when the riots took place. And instead of Sanjeevani, he was bringing the hospital from Delhi. So, in terms of community engagement, I have been working on two large projects. One is Object Speak, which is also my Instagram channel. And in this, which was a Facebook page first, it was simply about inviting people to discuss about the objects that surround them. And for me, it was a way of uh, redefining what the museum space is, and to bring it outside and also into the virtual space. The other project that I've been working on is Goa Familia, and that was begun for Serendipity Arts Foundation. And it's been going on for 2 years, where we are in fact engaging with family histories through their photo albums. And so people share stories with us. We also do interviews, we do documentation, and allow them to talk about their own memories. And we document these and put them together as a series of stories. So you can check both these out there online. Goa Familia really is a very interesting project, because sharing archives is not the most easiest thing to do, and it takes time for people to openly talk about their histories, particularly in a place like Goa, which has its own, complicated and layered history, which is 400 years of Portuguese rule. But it has been extremely interesting nonetheless to even, develop a system of bringing people into it. This is one of my latest projects. It's called Sanduka, the Living Museum of Cordova Culture. And here too, community interaction is something that lies at the very core. We are talking about using, curating stories rather than curating objects like they are in a museum space. So we are inviting people to bring us their stories, to send us stories about their understanding of Cordova culture and what they know, and to share it with us so that then we can build it into this museum space. So simply, I would like to go broadly into this space, where how different sort of times, like the pandemic, changes the way we begin to have to work as well. It's not about a formula. Each artist requires a different approach. Each theme or concept requires a different approach. And also, we as curators or cultural workers have to keep relearning and learning what we know. And so, the whole online space and curating in the online space was something that I had to do, but it was very exciting. It was a period when I got to showcase Lalita Lajmi's work, and she is an artist whom I respect very much. So I was very happy. So from these massive exhibitions that have large artists and big billboards, to very very simple work which is done by young artists um, in small spaces with no publicity, I feel happy to be part of, this entire variety of visual language. And I think that is something that gives me strength, that gives me hope on an everyday basis. This sort of being in a space that combines uh, beauty with an interface for dialogue, combines serious discussions about society with also, light-hearted moments of visual joy. These are the sort of things that I look for in my everyday. But when I look back and I see lots of these different publications, compilations that I've been part of, I do have a sense of pride. I do I do feel very happy that I was, given the opportunity to choose this line and to do so freely. And also to be in a position where I am now able to pass on all the opportunities I have got with another entire world, another entire section of young people who are coming into this space. So I ran a mentoring program for a year with the Piramal Art Residency. Earlier to that, I was with the Kochi Muzaris Students Biennale for some time, and we did the very initial versions of it, which was, a fantastic way to connect with young people, understand the faults of our education system, really try and help people reach their potential, but with tools that they develop themselves rather than anything else. Um, I am not able to move forward. Yeah. And coming now to the very end, I am currently running the Sunaparanta Arts Initiator Lab called SAIL, and this entire group of creative practitioners, and I say creative practitioners because they're not all fine artists. There are filmmakers, photographers, a textile designer, an art director, a graphic artist, and some fine artists here. And we have gone through 10 months of this mentorship program that I have designed, where there are different sorts of subjects that people find difficult, or we constantly overlook in our education spaces, right from addressing how to edit your work, to how do you write about yourself, to laws, copyrights, understanding understanding contracts, pricing, understanding how to use the virtual space for yourself, marketing, to various things. So this set of my students, as I call them, though they age, between 21 to 48, um, they are just preparing for their final showcase, and it's going to be from the 18th of May at Sunaparanta Arts Center, and I'm really, really looking forward to that because mentoring is something that I really enjoy. It extends from my curatorial practice. So with that, I'd like to come to the conclusion. I'd really like to thank all the artists who always give me images, so freely, who always give me work for my exhibitions. Also, all the other curators, art historians, and others that I work with, and the community. And I'm closing on this wonderful van that we painted last year, which has the entire sort of discussion of Goa's biodiversity on it, and it was very particularly made because Goa was is fighting some seriously harmful developmental projects that are running through the forest areas. So this is the little, these are the little means that are open to us to go out there and share with the community these concerns. So with that, I'll sort of exit from the screen. But if anyone would like to raise one of the, images or something to talk about, we can always bring it back. So I'll stop share, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much for that illuminating presentation, Lina. That was really, really wonderful and very, very thought-provoking. I will open the the room to questions now. Students, if you do have questions, please leave them in the chat box.
Yeah.
So we have one who has privately messaged us. They're asking, what's a curator's role in an artist's career?
Okay. So it's like this. Like I mentioned one artist's name. I mentioned several artists' names. Uh, it's like artists as well as they keep moving forward, there are various questions that come up in terms of concept, in terms of material, in terms of direction, the kinds of work that they're doing. What a curator does is, perhaps as I see myself, is to be a sort of bouncing board for those discussions and for those ideas. So I participate in the artist's process by being there to have those discussions and then say, okay, maybe you could try this out and see how it works. Because mental blocks and creative blocks are something that are constantly happening, right, to all of us. So I think in some ways I see myself in that space. It's also about allowing them to communicate better, because sometimes the answers are all there within you. It just requires for you to throw them out there to somebody, and then the answers are out there. So that's the space I see myself in as a curator. But in a larger sphere, my position is also to introduce new artists to galleries, to choose artists, to choose artists from one place and introduce them into another place, to create collaborations, to connect artists together so that something better might come out. Those are the kinds of things I do with artists and for artists.
Thank you. We have another one, and this is a fairly broad one, but they're asking, how does your practice change whether you're working within the museum spaces or outside of them? How does your practice change?
Right. So I work as an independent curator and art historian. So I essentially work from project to project. And usually museum projects are long term in their entire scope of work, in their scheduling, in the amount of research that goes into it. It's also about working with slightly different sort of material. When I'm working on a group show, say, and I have created a concept, I'm calling the artist and saying, you have 6 months and we can have a discussion about the kind of work that you're going to make and so on. And it's all fresh and it's all, right there. But within museum spaces, there is a different sort of history that is involved. There's a different way you treat an object, and a careful way in which you have to interpret things, because you are looking at history, you're looking at culture in a different way. So definitely there is a sort of, it's an organic change. It's a space that I am as comfortable with, in and out. But not only museum spaces, but also spaces outside, like live. You know, I have been documenting live rituals and customs over the past few months in certain areas, and it's also a different space. So as the space changes, you sort of tweak your methodology, you understand the ethics of it, and then you work within that space.
Thank you for that. Something very specific to the career of a curator. Is it a financially rewarding career?
That's absolutely important. Luckily for me, it has been, and it's a very niche space, I have to say. It's not like tons of people are in this space. But when I became an independent curator, I did have serious qualms. I wondered whether I could ever sustain myself. But I think that switching between these different spaces, that is working with purely commercial galleries, working within the NGO space and education, but also doing long-term uh, research projects with museums that are really, well supported and paid, has been good for me because I've been able to balance my time. Because I do a lot of mentoring also with young people who are coming out of colleges free of cost. I put in that time because I'm able to balance it out with a large gallery paying me a good fee to write 1,000 words or whatever. So it is viable, but it is hard work, and one has to be able to build some sort of credibility in the field, and then people begin to see that as some sort of value.
So we have another one. Is there a difference that you have noticed in the way children and adults see art or respond to art?
Yes, definitely. And it's really sad that our schools don't have more art activities. The arts are always left as extracurricular,
Mm.
though the NEP now is, introducing art as something that is going to be part of the curriculum, uh, the main academic curriculum. So I'm happy about that. But there is a huge difference because children really don't have inhibitions when they begin with any kind of creative practice, be it working with clay or colors or paints. It's all the conditioning that comes afterwards that sort of kills probably every creative bone in a person, and it can happen. I have met adults who sometimes come to an art appreciation course or something very hesitantly, and then they say, I don't know anything about art. As a child, I really loved art, but now I am this. And I don't know anything about art, and I'm afraid to go into a gallery because I don't know anything. So, definitely, if children are given the opportunities to move in these spaces without fear, to understand that culture is part of life, that creativity does not mean doing a good drawing, but creativity is about a different sort of process, about changing your perspectives, about understanding that anything that you do can be done creatively. That is what I would say should be brought in more, and then we won't have so many adults looking away from art spaces. We'll have more buyers, we'll have more people understanding what artists do because everyone will know what it means. So that's an important question to raise.
So someone remembers reading on your presentation that it is also dealing with irate artists. So they're asking, when does it become difficult to work with artists?
Um, Well, artists can be very egotistical. They have huge egos, and I have had all sorts of different situations. And this is not a generalization, it is to do with some people. And artists can be very fussy, extremely sensitive. So, I've had lots of different sorts of problems. I won't go, I don't think I'll go into details here. But basically, yes, sensitivity, egos. Sometimes there is a hierarchy also. A senior artist won't want to have his work next to a junior artist, or would not want to be placed in the corner of a gallery. Very, very physical and practical things like this, wherein the curator, unfortunately, is placed there to deal with the whole thing. Luckily, I'm a very calm person, and that's probably why I have reached this 20-year mark in my career.
That's quite amazing. I think someone really wants to explore the relationship between your work and architecture. So they've asked, As someone who's a curator, you're also a designer in some senses. So how do you view a space when you're trying to curate an exhibition?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, and I'm happy about it because display is absolutely my favorite thing in the whole process, and it's a long process between building the concept and putting communicating with the artist and finally seeing the artworks. So for me, the space becomes something very organic and very alive. It is something that begins to speak. It begins to speak to me, and it begins to speak to the art. The art begins to speak to the space. And I love showcasing work in spaces that are other than the regular, you know, plain white cubes. I have showcased work in old school buildings, in laboratories, in outside in the open, in parks, in garages. So for me, the space immediately also has its own resonance. It comes with its own set of aesthetics and its own history, So I constantly keep this imagination alive in my mind. I begin to visualize things much before they begin to be there in the space. So, yes, I think that it's a very crucial part, but also because I work with heritage and because I work within outside spaces, architecture then becomes a very important part of the way I see things. So that's really interesting.
We have another student's question here asking, how does someone become a curator? Are there specific degrees or qualifications? Because you just said that you run mentorship programs. So is that something that is not available in the mainstream education in general?
Curatorial programs or mentorship?
So as in qualifications, how do
Yeah, so I think that now there are specific degrees that one can take in curatorial practices and critical thinking and museum studies and a combination of these that will then provide the background for curation. But like I said, I didn't do any of them. It was
Hmm.
for me a very organic process of being able to put myself in that mediator's position and also be a little articulate. I think that that has been an important thing. But I don't suppose there are curators of every sort now, and there are curators of different things. So I work with art. I think people work with music. People work with different sorts of things. So uh, in terms of what courses are available, I'm afraid that's an answer I cannot give very clearly. But if someone is really interested, I could always check and let you know.
As a final question for today, what are some of your favorite objects or art or pieces or shows that you've come across?
That's a tough one because it's simply impossible to even answer. Let me think of something really inspiring to me. Perhaps Chaitanya Samrani's Edge of Desire comes to mind because that is one of the first exhibitions I saw where indigenous arts were included within the broader framework of contemporary art. And there was a wonderful dialogue between the arts of so many different people across India. So for me, I think that was one seminal exhibition that impacted me and I think really sort of pushed me to think in certain ways. And well, I've seen a few different exhibitions abroad that constantly gave me ideas about different sorts of display methodologies, more practical aspects of how do you use light, um, Edward Glissant's ideas, of the archipelago, that's something that has influenced me a lot, not in terms of its use in curation, and also as a philosophy in general about the way people are connected and about how our culture, really is this space with no center. So these are some of the things that simply come to mind, in terms of what inspires me. But yeah, I think there are lots of exciting things around, and I keep learning new things.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you so, so much for coming today and giving us such an exciting and illuminating talk on your work and the way you practice art curation and art history. With that, thank you so much for coming, and thank you to our Dean Samir Shah, our program chair Kat, and the CFP team for their support always. Thanks also to Dhruvika and Diana for organizing and managing the logistics of these sessions. And thank you to all the students for attending and for asking your questions. We hope you have a lovely evening ahead, and hearty good luck to your upcoming projects as well.
Thank you so much, and all the best to everyone. Bye.